Anyone else feel like they don't fit into the current Star Wars culture war? Like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely did not like The Acolyte. I do think its creator worked way too hard on pushing identity politics rather than competent writing. But on the other hand, no, I'm not innately offended by a show having a very diverse cast in 2024, which some of the more vocal critics, from YouTube and elsewhere clearly were. I mean, before the show even came out. And no, I don't even care when it feels a little bit forced, which it does in this case. Yeah, it's a fair criticism to say that the show comes off as being mandate-driven. Like, we must have an ultra-diverse cast. Regardless, we live in a diverse world. I'm pretty much okay with it. Yeah, sorry, offended white people. That doesn't mean all white people, of course. Sorry to those who are offended that it's not the 1950s anymore, where 9/10 of everybody in every show and movie had to be white. And in my opinion, the two best actors by far in the show were both, quote-unquote diversity picks. And two actors of Asian descent, one of them doesn't even speak English, and had to work through that in reading his lines phonetically. But it was a great performance, so I don't care. I'm offended and unoffended by the lesbian couple in the show. I don't care if there's a same-sex couple in a show or movie, as long as it serves the story and it's well done. The problem is this one wasn't. And the social agenda in including them just overrode good storytelling. What was that cringe-worthy line about how the universe doesn't like women like us? Just story-breaking, soapbox garbage. And I'm okay with making that point, but make it well, make it subtly. Put down the bullhorn, get down off of the soapbox. Good storytelling avoids that. And so again, I am definitely more against this show than for it. Like, I didn't think it was very well done. I'm really glad it got canceled. I desperately wish Disney would stop trying to do performative wokeness and obvious virtue signaling. Just focus on making good stories instead. Maybe focus on having character motivations that actually make sense, don't contradict themselves. Avoid dumb, almost just incredibly obvious logistical plot holes, etc. But I can't get on board with a lot of the critics either. Some of it just comes off as obviously bigoted, or that's at least a part of the motivation. I really, really don't like what Leslie Headland, the show creator, did to my beloved Star Wars franchise. Only the latest misstep by Disney. But if in hating on the show you feel compelled to take shots at her for being a lesbian, then you're a bigot. Or you're certainly coming off as one. If the creator of the show was proudly Irish or Irish-American or African-American, would you feel a need to take shots at that? And to make snide references to that when you criticize the show or its creator? Probably not. If they were straight, would you feel compelled to focus on that? No. If you think making fun of an Asian actor's accent isn't bigoted, you might want to rethink that. I find that nonsense just as ridiculous as the people on the other side, literally crying over the cancellation of the show. Because they think it was canceled as an act of prejudice, or by letting the prejudiced crowd win. It was canceled because it cost $189 million, but shed its audience at an alarming rate and ended with a very small audience. And welcome to reality. Disney is a business. If the show was profitable, they would not have canceled it because of a critical vocal minority. In fact, it would have been a culture war win for them to renew the show in the face of that. Back to the really visible critics, I agree with probably 80-90% of what they say, because again, on the merits, I think the show was pretty bad. But everyone has to be in one of these two camps, and their camp is the annoyed by a social agenda taking precedent over good storytelling. Yeah, I think Disney is guilty of that, and I despise it. But then if you're in that camp, you're supposed to also automatically root for Gina Carano and her stupid lawsuit against Disney? No, that thing's ridiculous. A company being free to fire you because they don't want to be associated with your public comments is actually a conservative principle. But she, of course, is immediately for the nanny state if it can benefit her. And so she's crying discrimination. And this is just where I'm a man without a country on this. Regarding Star Wars, something I've loved my entire life, because I'm equally repelled by the hypocrisy in a lot of the acolyte defense. Just because you're progressive doesn't mean you have to support a show that makes a point about saying, look, we're progressive, and that has content in it that you should be very much against, given your stated principles. This infamous scene here, a man in a position of power forces a female in an inferior position. In fact, she's his prisoner. To see him naked, and yeah, don't pretend that that's not what was happening in that scene. And she eventually ends up staying with her captor, choosing to do that, holding his hand. It looks like there's a love connection starting up. Isn't this a classic kidnapper-predator fantasy? That she wants him, and if he just forces her to spend enough time with him or see him naked, she'll come around? This is decidedly anti-feminist if you actually think about it. Are his predatory actions okay because he's hot? This scene should have gotten a big backlash from the very people defending the show, because it virtue signals on the surface, so then everything about it must be great. And speaking of the outrage that never came for this show, from the left, it was created by Harvey Weinstein's former multi-year personal assistant. How the hell did this show ever get off the ground, given that? Did Kathleen Kennedy and others at Disney really believe it? Could they really be naive enough to think Leslie Headland had no idea what was going on with Harvey Weinstein before it came out in the public? And now let's go back to that glorified shower scene. Isn't that exactly what Harvey Weinstein did to some of his victims? But the show is surface level woke, so, nothing to see here. Hey, sorry to his victims. This is the only person on Earth we could find to make a Star Wars show. So that's where I'm at, and back to the beginning, no, I'm not offended by a Star Wars project being ultra-inclusive. It takes a lot, although a lot of people manage to do this, to overlook the fact that inclusivity was a core message of the original trilogy. The rebellion is very diverse. There's fish people, there's men, women, droids, a woman is in charge, etc. But do you know what the Empire happened to look like? Its power structure? Yeah, pretty monolithic. Basically nothing but pale and male. So given that this is part of what's at the heart of the original Star Wars, I'm okay with it getting upped, upping the ante deep into the 21st century in a Star Wars project. I just want it to be done well like it used to be in this franchise. Did anybody watch Return of the Jedi and feel like they were getting preached to? No, because it was just there, baked into the story. I mean, look at the end of Return of the Jedi. It's a veritable melting pot celebration, this multi-species racial celebration. That's how the whole trilogy ends. Same thing with The Phantom Menace. Part of the irony, where multiple times in the George Lucas era, Star Wars got accused of being racist by the same kind of surface-level thinkers who feel you have to defend the acolyte because it signals the right virtues to you, which is just as wrong as being preemptively offended by a show because it has a very diverse cast, or letting your criticism of the show once it was out be tinged with racism, sexism, etc. Well, lastly, I'll say I'm a proponent of free speech, so I also think the campaign to get Gina Carano fired was as dumb as the campaign to get certain YouTubers demonetized. But as stated, I think her lawsuit is dumb, and so I can't support either side in that campaign and or lawsuit back and forth. Which I guess is just yet one more piece of proof that I don't fit into the current Star Wars culture wars. Maybe you don't either.